Right now, it is just a Groundhog's Day of misery for the New York Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. I've been covering the New York Mets on this show since the 2019 season. It's the only podcast that covers the Mets 7 days a week throughout the regular season. If you want to find some of my written work, you can do so over at justbaseball.com, where I work as the editor-in-chief. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Football season's around the corner. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your futures bets now. Well, the Mets have now lost, 11 of 12 games as they get swept by the Brewers this weekend. An ugly series where the Brewers really just showed us what a great baseball team looks like. I mean, that right now is the clear-cut favorite to win the World Series. I'm sure the betting odds will still have the Dodgers, and who knows, maybe the Mets and the Yankees, because those teams just get a lot of bets placed on them, and that sometimes juices their odds. But if the Brewers aren't the favorites, they should be. That is a ridiculously good baseball team. Every single guy in that starting lineup has speed. They put pressure on you. They extend at bats. They put the ball in play. They defend really well on the other side of it. They have a great bullpen. Their rotation's been solid. I mean, they are just an absolute wagon right now. And they look a lot like when the Mets were at their best last year, where you just couldn't catch a break in that lineup for the Mets, where Jose Iglesias might be batting near the bottom, but he's going to grind out an 11-pitch at bat in a critical moment, playing way over his head. But we saw guys like Joey Ortiz, who hasn't been very good this year, come through multiple times in this game. Just everybody chipping in, everybody pulling the rope in the same direction. They are the picture, in the dictionary right now for team chemistry and just guys that clearly are all feeding off of each other. And it really shows you how far ahead they are of the Mets, how much the Mets have to close that gap if they want any hope of making a run come October, if they're even going to be there in October, because if this skid doesn't stop soon, they are going to fall out of the playoff picture entirely, something that we never expected for the Mets this season once they got off to that great start. We thought, if anything, well, the Phillies might beat them in the division, but they'll grab a wild card spot. Now, I mean, who knows? But I also will say, as we get into this game a little bit more, I think if the Mets went into this series and they were on a high and they had won 7 of their last 10 games, they were coming off a series win at home, I think if they had gone to this series and played each of those games the exact same way, it would not have felt as devastating, because what has happened here is you are compounding loss after loss after loss, poor series after poor series after poor series. And so realistically, for the most part, the Mets did not play that terrible in this series. They definitely made the defensive mistakes on Saturday that they had to clean up, and their starting pitching was not good. But they got out to leads in every single game. Their bullpen looked good in stretches. Obviously, they blew games, but they were overextended. And you had Ryan Stanek blow one game. You had Ryan Helsley not pitch well in these other 2 games, but he's been pitched a ton lately. So, yeah, it wasn't a good weekend for the Mets. I'm clearly not saying that. But I also don't think that they played such horrible baseball. Like the last 2 games, their at-bats were good in stretches. You saw some positive signs from Pete Alonso and Juan Soto and Starling Marte. Good to see Beatty homer. We'll talk about that here in a second as we get into the game recap. But for the Mets overall, the big problem remains the big problem, which is the starting rotation. But everything looked worse and seems so much more dire, or seems so much more dire right now, because you went up against an absolute buzzsaw on this Brewers team that just refused to lose baseball games. And that's really, I think, the biggest story of the weekend. But to get into the specifics of this game on Sunday, the Mets get off to that early lead. Francisco Lindor hit by a pitch, steals second, scores on a base hit from Juan Soto. Good to see him get a hit with a runner in scoring position. Soto then steals a base. Brandon Nimmo walks before Pete Alonso hits into a double play ball. Obviously, that's a rally killer, but Jeff McNeil did pick him up and get a 2-out hit. So the Mets had 2 runs in the first inning. Second inning, Beatty hit that homer, a leadoff shot. his 12th of the year. Third inning, Pete Alonso rifled a double into the right field corner with one out. Jeff McNeil popped up, but then Ronnie Mauricio picked up McNeil, getting a base hit to drive in Pete. Fourth inning, Cedric Mullins hit his first Mets homer, putting the Mets up 5-0. And Sean Manaea, through the first 3 innings, looked great. Gave up a double in the first that he worked around, a 2-out walk in the second, had a 1-2-3 third inning. Then in the fourth inning, it all fell apart. William Contreras got him for a leadoff homer. Andrew Vaughn got a base hit. Then Manaea had a strikeout and a ground out. Nearly got out of the jam. Then he gives up a double to Danny Jansen. Brandon Lockridge, who had a 10-pitch at bat earlier in the game, continued to be a thorn in Manaea's side. He drew a walk. That put Joey Ortiz up with the bases loaded, and he came through driving in 2 with a single. Finally, Manaea got a ground out to get out of it, but the damage was done. 3 runs came across. The Mets at that point had a 5-3 lead. But in the 5th inning, they went out there again. They got a leadoff single from Juan Soto. Nimmo bunted him to second. Pete Alonso doubled him home. The Mets extend that lead back to 6-3. But then DL Hall came in and completely shut down the Mets from there. That's what makes the Brewers so intriguing and so tough to beat, is that they could have a guy in Quinn Priester who's been great all season, have a brutal start, gives up 6 runs, and then you just drop in DL Hall, who gives you 3 2/3 scoreless relief, hitless relief, and takes the Brewers, who might have had a little bit of a tired bullpen. Well, guess what? DL Hall just takes the ball from your starting pitcher and hands it to not your closer, but the guy that closed this game, or I guess didn't close it, but held the game tied before the walk-off in the bottom half. Nick Mears handed it off to him in the 9th inning. So for Hall, he was nasty, and the Mets continued to struggle against left-handed pitching. In the meantime, the Brewers just kept chipping away. The Mets sent Sean Manaea out there for the first batter of the 5th, gave up a leadoff single, and was pulled to 87 pitches because Contreras was coming up, and Contreras had homered against him. And once again, Contreras would homer, this time off of Reed Garrett. Garrett settled in after that. He got the next 3 batters out to keep the game at 6-4. Brooks Raley pitched a 1-2-3 6th inning. Actually, it was 6-5 after the home run by Contreras. Garrett again gets to the 6th. Brooks Raley Garrett gets to the 5th. Raley gets to the 6th, thanks to a diving catch by Pete Alonso in that inning. That was big. Tyler Rogers pitching his 3rd straight day, which is one of the reasons why the Mets traded so much to get him, because he does have that rubber arm. He goes out there, gives up a couple of singles, but is able to get the double play ball to get himself out of that jam in the 7th. And the Mets were clinging to that 1-run lead going into the 8th inning. And they had Helsley and Diaz set up, but Ryan Helsley ends up coughing it up. He walked the leadoff man, got a fly out, then gave up a single, but then got a big strikeout. So it was on the verge of getting out of it before Joey Ortiz got him for a game-tying single. Edwin Diaz came in, got the final out of that inning. Thanks again to Pete Alonso making a diving catch. And then you have, or maybe it was a diving stop, but regardless, gets through that inning. You get to the bottom of the 9th inning after the Mets fail to score, and Edwin Diaz gives up a leadoff walk-off homer to Isaac Collins, the standout rookie for the Brewers. And they're able to sweep this series. That team is just ridiculously good. Again, the Mets had early leads in all 3 games, and the Brewers just never gave up, kept fighting. And it's just a team that right now is head and shoulders better than the New York Mets. But I don't think the season's lost. I don't think it's over on August 11th. There's still plenty of baseball left to be played. The question is, can this Mets team right the ship before it actually does get out of hand? Because the division is starting to get to the point where you can almost give up on it. Not quite there yet, but it certainly has not been a good last couple of weeks for the Mets in that regard. And the wild card race is getting, or the wild card lead, I should say, is getting narrower every single day. So I want to talk about that, but why there's still a little bit of room for optimism. I'll try to put you on the therapy couch a little bit here in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Day Hue, and so is this hat that I'm wearing. For a Mets fan like me, this one hits the mark. Game Day Hue makes clean, no logo gear with team-inspired colorways for every pro and college fan base. It's all about letting your colors speak for you. No giant logos, just smart, versatile style that works on game day, on the course, or anywhere in between. The hat pairs perfectly with my usual gear. It doesn't replace my team's logos. just adds to the lineup. If you're a Knicks fan, one hat, Mets, Knicks, you're all good. It's the kind of hat that reps your team without screaming. It's subtle, but still says everything. That's not just hats. You also got the split shade gloves made for the golf course, the perfect gift for the fan who has everything. And right now, you can get 15% off with the code MLB15 at GameDayHue.com. That's GameDayHue.com. The code even stacks on bundle deals, so now's the time to load up. Let your colors talk because colors speak louder than words. That's GameDayHue.com, code MLB15. If you're watching on YouTube today, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Help us get closer to our next goal of 15,000 subscribers. And the New York Mets are suddenly 5.5 games back of the Phillies in the National League East. They still play them 7 times, but that is becoming a pretty deep hole to climb their way out of. So you say, all right, just make it into the dance. Who cares if you win the division or not? Recently, winning the NL East is a little bit of a curse because the team that wins the division usually is the one that has the earlier playoff exit than the team that makes it as the wild card. So, hey, it's fine. It'll be the wild card again. Problem, the Reds are now only a game and a half back of the Mets in the wild card race. The Giants, I think, were within 4, if I'm not mistaken. They're still hanging in there. So the Mets lead in that wild card race is tenuous at best at this point. And you got the Braves coming to town next. You play the Braves twice in the next couple of weeks. The Braves continue to beat up on the Mets the way they did the last time the Mets saw them. I mean, you could be looking at the outside, or you could be in the outside looking in as soon as this upcoming weekend. I mean, it could be on Wednesday morning, depending on the Reds do play on Monday, so that could get them a game back. I mean, you could be even with the Reds after Tuesday and potentially on Wednesday. You could be out of it. Now, if the Reds are winning, the Phillies would be losing because those two teams are going head to head. But regardless, the Mets can't focus on anybody but themselves right now. They just have to play better baseball, and they haven't been doing it. So what gives? What is there to be optimistic about when I say I'm going to put you on the therapy couch? Well, like I said, that Brewers team is just insanely good. But I thought there was some positives to take from that series, particularly the way the bat swung it on Sunday, scoring runs in each inning through the first 5. That was very impressive. Juan Soto clearly coming out of it, and Juan Soto can carry a team. Pete Alonso is coming out of it. He can carry a team, and he's on the doorstep of history. I'm happy he didn't homer on Sunday because now you got a chance here. 6 games at home. This should be the week that Pete Alonso grabs that all-time home run record at home in front of a bunch of fans at Citi Field. It should be an awesome moment. But if you're just looking at this lineup for the next, whatever it is we have left in the season, 7 weeks or 8 weeks, if those two guys are hot, that can drive your offense. And we'll see about Lindor and Nimmo. They've had more Lindor. Nimmo hasn't really been showing anything, but Lindor has shown little flashes here and there. He's had a good game here, good game there. Ultimately, it was a bad series for him, but if you get those 4 guys going and you saw Cedric Mullins, the impact he can have, I just don't think the Mets are putting up any lineup on paper right now that I'm looking at and saying, oof, that's a rough Mets lineup. This is no lineup where you're seeing Rafael Ortega or Jonathan Villar or whatever it is. You're not seeing the DJ Stewart. I mean, you're not seeing those guys in the lineup that make you sort of bash your head in and be like, what are they doing? I mean, they have every lineup they're putting out now. You have 9 hitters that you sort of feel good about. Now, getting the consistent production from some of those guys over at third base when you're mixing the playing time so much with them, easier said than done. Trying to juggle that whole playing time mix is going to be something the Mets have to figure out. And I will talk about that more on tomorrow's show likely. I've been teasing it for a couple days now. I want to spend some real time on how can they make all these guys effective. But again, as much as the offense has struggled, there's enough there that the Mets don't have to reinvent the wheel to end up with a competent offense. They just need their star players to play to the back of the baseball card, and they just need the bottom of the lineup to continue to be pretty effective, which I think they have been over the last couple of weeks. There's been a couple guys that are swinging it well at a time, and that's all you really want out of the bottom of the lineup, and they just have so many options to choose from. So while the lineup has been an issue this year, I still think that this can be a good offensive team, especially with those 2 run producers in the middle with Soto and Alonso, maybe finally starting to turn that corner. The bullpen obviously had some rough outings here. Some of those individuals did not pitch great in this series. Ryan Helsley wasn't very good. Obviously, Ryan Stanek continues to struggles. There were some guys that didn't perform up to their best, but I'm not worried about that bullpen. I'm not worried about those 6 arms the Mets have collected that can all pitch and leverage. I think that's fine. What continues to be the biggest problem for the Mets is their starting pitching. And I think there's some optimism that changes are on the horizon because for this next series, it's already listed Clay Holmes, David Peterson, Kodai Senga. But on Friday, it's TBD, and there is a world where Nolan McLean could make his MLB debut. Now, my money would still be on Paul Blackburn to make that start instead of McLean. But here's one thing that is very noteworthy. Nolan McLean pitched on Sunday. First time this season, he has pitched twice in a week because to pitch twice in a week in AAA, where they don't play games on Monday, you have to pitch on 4 days rest. And he has not pitched on 4 days rest at all this season. And my assumption would be throughout his entire career up to this point. But he pitched on 4 days rest on Sunday. And that does look a lot like what we saw over a year ago now when Christian Scott pitched on 4 days rest for the first time in Syracuse. And his very next start came in the big leagues. So I would not be shocked if we see Nolan McLean finally making that MLB debut on Friday. Now, how does that factor in with Blackburn's return? What does that mean for Brandon Sproat? We still don't know. Another interesting note on Sproat, they pushed him back, as we talked about earlier this past week, where they had pushed him back instead of pitching on Wednesday to Thursday. And at the time when he did pitch on Wednesday, I was thinking, is Sproat coming up this weekend? Then he pitched on Thursday and made it clear that was not happening. But that does set up Brandon Sproat to pitch on 4 days rest on Tuesday and potentially again on Sunday if they wanted to, maybe in the big leagues. So there is a world where we see those two guys come up and start to make an impact as soon as this week or not long after that. But they still have to figure out Paul Blackburn too. They have to figure out what they're going to do with Frankie Montas. There's still pieces that have to be maneuvered around to make those guys a part of this team. But when you see what DL Hall did on Sunday, that's got to be even more of a confirming factor for the Mets, where they look at them and they say, yeah, that could have been for us a Nolan McLean in one of these games where you drop McLean in after a bad start from somebody else, and he can give you 3 2/3 of hitless relief and carry you to the back end and save your bullpen. The Mets have to get creative to figure this thing out because you're not going to give up on Sean Manaea. You're not going to give up on Kodai Senga. You have to just let these guys work their way through it. You can't give up and should give up on Frankie Montas, as I talked about in yesterday's show, but to try to navigate it, try to figure out, okay, how are you going to deal with Clay Holmes and him wearing down? Well, pair him up with Nolan McLean for a little bit and let those two guys run. I've been talking about this for weeks. Do it finally. They're both going to pitch. Actually, now would be Brandon Sproat, that'd be lined up with him. So I'm wrong on that one. It would be Brandon Sproat that's going to pitch on Tuesday the same day as Clay Holmes. So pair those guys together. Figure something out. But that is the thing that I think can help this team. And ultimately, I feel like the Mets are going to break their way out of this awful stretch when a guy named anything other than David Peterson takes the ball and carries the Mets through 6 innings. Once they get a starting pitcher through 6 and they end that awful streak, which is now an MLB record since the modern day era, the live ball era, since 1901, no team has gone this many games without another starting pitcher going through 6 innings and having just one starter do that. It's a really niche record, but it is a record of futility for this Mets team. Once they break out of that, I feel like everything else will fall into place, but they have to find their way out of that. And if they can't find their way out of it, if they're only going to get 5 innings from these guys, they have to be creative. And that's what bringing those 2 top pitching prospects up will do for this team. So we don't know when it's going to happen, but I do think there are 3 pitchers that are going to join this roster soon: Paul Blackburn, Nolan McLean, and Brandon Sproat. Now, how you get them all on the roster is definitely a tricky one because there's only going to be 2 spots. You're not going to cut any of those 6 relievers who have been built to be your back end with Edwin Diaz, Ryan Helsley, Tyler Rogers, Reed Garrett, Gregory Soto, and who am I missing? Brooks Raley. I mean, that's 6. You're not touching that. So you'd have to cut bait with Ryan Stanek, which I talked about a bunch on yesterday's show. They should. You have to cut him. And then you have another spot that's in the bullpen right now that's occupied by Hagenman that can obviously be a spot for a Blackburn or one of the kids as soon as this week. And then once you get to September, you get an extra roster spot, and that gives you a little more flexibility. So maybe it's only one of the kids that comes up for now and is part of this team. And if they don't fare well immediately, you always could flip them for the other one and option them. But the Mets should be getting some reinforcements that hopefully help them overcome this crippling starting pitching issue that they've had for a couple of months now. And once they figure that out, I really think that everything can really settle for this team, because when you just have inconsistent starting pitching, it makes everyone's jobs harder. It makes the bullpen's job clearly harder because they have to carry more of the load, but it also makes the position players' life harder because, for one, they're out in the field watching these blow-ups, and then it just puts so much more pressure on them to score. It just takes away from that ability to just play free and easy because you're always behind. And even if you're not behind when it comes to the scoreboard, like this game they weren't once the Mets turned it over to the bullpen, it's still such a mental knock that you take when Sean Manaea seemingly is cruising through 3. And you're thinking, maybe Manaea is going to be the guy that breaks this streak and gets through 6. And then the 4th inning, he gives up a home run. He loads the bases. He gives up that hit. And you're just thinking, here we go again. Once again, the same problem continues to plague this team. I think it really is the start of all these issues. Not that the rotation is why the Mets can't hit, but it definitely plays a factor in just setting this team up to play poor baseball. And that's what they've done lately. So I'm not saying that everything is going to be fixed by the 2 kids coming up, but I think a lot's just going to be fixed by time, because you're not going to just be this bad forever. Law of averages, at some point, the Mets are going to go back in the other direction. And realistically, while it's a lot of in the division games that you're about to play, you're playing the dregs of the NL East over this next month here. I mean, you do have a series against the Phillies, and that's going to be massive if you want to hang in either race, but particularly in the division race. But you look at the other teams you play the Braves and then the Mariners. The Mariners are a toughie, but then you got the Nationals and the Braves on the road. You play the Phillies, and then you play the Marlins for a 4-gamer to close out the month. So you are playing a lot of sub-500 teams. Now, the Mets have certainly been a sub-500 team for some time now, but on the season, they're still over 500, and they've been great at home. So they have to get back to that. If they can just have a good homestand and wash away some of this ugliness, they can hopefully galvanize around each other, hit the road next week, and maybe do their thing against the Nationals and even have a good series in Atlanta. And if they can do all of that in 2 weeks, everything can be fixed. And maybe instead of being down 5.5 games in this division, maybe it's 2.5 games or 3.5 games, and they have a shot to really make it a race again when the Phillies come to Citi Field at the end of this month. But on the other side of that coin, if the Braves keep beating them up, if the Mariners are anything close to what they looked like last year when these two teams met, and that's a bad series, you never know. It can continue to falter and spiral, and the Mets might be in a brutal spot when they square off against the Phillies with their playoff hopes dwindling entirely. But I think there's still so much talent on this roster that it's way, 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 way too early to give up on this team. So I don't know if that was a good enough of an optimistic pep talk for you, because there's still a lot of downside to discuss, and that can't be ignored. But if the Mets at some point in the next 2 weeks get the real Sean Manaea and Kodai Senga back, and if they call up one of the prospects and they just give a jolt to this pitching staff, I think things can look a lot different very quickly. But speaking of promotions, the Mets made some pretty drastic moves when it came to their farm system. Tong, Carson Benge, Jett Williams, Ryan Clifford, they're all going up to AAA. I want to discuss a huge string of promotion the Mets made on Sunday in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. I want you to mark the calendar for August 26th because it is officially FanDuel Futures Day, a brand new holiday for football fans who live for bold predictions and preseason hunches. For just 24 hours, FanDuel is giving you deals on NFL season predictions. So whether you're calling your MVP, your eyeing long shot division winners, or you're ready to crown your Super Bowl champ before week 1 even kicks off, this is your moment. You can take a flyer on the MVP race. Like I was looking at Jaden Daniels plus 1,000 thinking, that's not a bad bet. Maybe he can actually build off that strong rookie season, win an MVP. You never know. You can look at who might be able to win the Super Bowl, and you might want to crown your champion in August. Maybe the Bills finally get over the hump at plus 700. You can even parlay your division winner dark horses if you want a long shot to win big. Get crazy. Maybe the Jets and the Giants both win the division this year. Those are some real dark horses, and I cannot even imagine what the odds would be for that in a parlay. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your futures bets now, because Futures Day is one day and one day only, August 26th. FanDuel, play your game. If you're an everydayer that always tunes into the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. It's our texting service. You'll get updates from me anytime news breaks on the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. Take part in our Locked On Mets sign photo giveaways. You can live graphic sent to your phone each day so you know who's in the starting lineup without ever having to go on social media. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. And the last time I spent a bunch of time on the Mets farm system, I talked a lot about those guys in Binghamton, the Binghamton Four. Jonah Tong, Jett Williams, Carson Benge, and Ryan Clifford. And I discussed how really any of those guys, although I thought Carson Benge would finish this year in Double A just because it was not too many games he played at that level. But I really spent a lot of time on Jonah Tong and Jett Williams, and how both of them, who have been in Double A all season, had earned a promotion to Triple A. And I said the only reason why it would make sense to keep those guys in Double A is if you value them all playing together in a playoff push. Well, it turns out they valued them all playing together in a playoff push, but they decided to have that take place in AAA instead because they weren't getting challenged enough in AA. And so they take all four of those guys and they bring them on up to AAA. So if you live in Binghamton and you're a Rumble Ponies fan, your team just got absolutely gutted. You did get some consolation prizes that came up from high A that I'll talk about in a sec. But yeah, the big driving force for that AA team just went away. Jonah Tong on Sunday had another great start, his last one in AA. 5 innings pitched, allowed just 3 hits, 1 run, did not issue a walk, struck out 8. His season ERA right now is 1.59. It's 162 strikeouts to lead all of minor league baseball. You can make a case he has been the most dominant pitcher in minor league baseball this season, and you can make a case that hasn't been very close. So this is overdue. Jonah Tong was too good for AA. We will see if he hits that same wall that a lot of the other Mets top pitching prospects have hit when they get up to AAA. Now, it's a wall that we saw Brandon Sproat hit. We definitely didn't see Christian Scott hit it. Before that, you had Mike Vassell and Dom Hamill, who were at one point in time some of the Mets top starting pitching prospects. Those guys really struggled at the level. So it's been a tough adjustment for some of these guys. Nolan McLean didn't have any issues with it. We'll see if Jonah Tong does. But again, he should have been up weeks ago if he was talking about when he was ready for it. But the Mets obviously still have things they're working on. I think the one thing to look at for Tong right now, it's a matter of having that feel for his curveball. Once he really has that locked in, because this year his fastball and changeup as a 1-2 combination have been as good of a set of pitches that someone has to pair off each other as any in minor league baseball. That curveball originally was his best pitch at one point in time. It sort of fell off a little bit. There's been times where he's lost the command of it. It hasn't been very competitive. If he gets that curveball honed in, I mean, this guy has ace potential. So really excited to see what he does at AAA. Jett Williams was hitting 281, 390 on base, 477 slug, had a great season in AA in 96 games, an 867 OPS, 10 home runs, 29 doubles, 5 triples, 32 stolen bases, playing a lot of shortstop, but also at second base and center field as well. I mean, Jett should be a huge contributor next season, so it's good that he gets some playing time at triple this year. Ryan Clifford, I could say it's a surprise, but it's not when you consider the amount of time that he spent in AA, over 200 games over the last 2 years. Part of that is because he got promotion up to AA a little bit earlier maybe than anticipated last season, just because he was struggling in high A so much playing that ballpark. They thought that brought him up to AA, he would perform better, and he did. This year, he has made some improvements on what he did last season. He's got a career-high slugging percentage of 493. He's hitting 243, 355 on base, and he has 24 home runs and 75 RBIs in 105 games. So he is well on his way to a 30 home run season, which is something that the Mets have not had in their farm system since Pete Alonso, if I'm not mistaken. Even with Alvarez and Mauricio and Vientos and Beatty, none of those guys ever hit 30 in a year. They still didn't hit 40 either. Mark Vientos hit like one year, it might have been 25 and 75 games. So he certainly was on pace. He just didn't play nearly enough. But this is power the Mets don't really have throughout their farm system. Ryan Clifford is clearly the top slugger in their system, and it's good to see him get some at-bats up at AAA to close out this season. And then you get to Carson Benge, first-round pick from last year, who is skyrocketing on top prospect list, all the way up to 19 on our top 100 at Just Baseball, and I believe Aram is already ready to move him up even further the next time he makes an update, which will be at the end of the season. There's every chance that we're talking about a top 10 prospect in baseball going into next year, if not even higher than that. So this is a really exciting prospect. Only spends 32 games in AA, hit 317, 407 on base, 571 slug, 8 home runs, 6 doubles and a triple, 18 RBIs, just tore the cover off the ball. He's been playing center field the whole time, looks good out there. This is the center fielder of the future for the New York Mets. There's no doubt about that. I think he's now clearly the top prospect in this system now. The question is, when do we see him? And for those of you who are already clamoring for Carson Benge, you didn't trade what you traded for Cedric Mullins to not have him start for this team. He would have to go through a brutal stretch for the Mets to, at the 11th hour, call up Carson Benge. And that never really works. One example of when it did, Evan Carter for the Rangers back in 2023 had a great 23-game stint with them at the end of the season and then carried that over in the playoffs. And I believe he batted leadoff in front of Corey Seager, if memory serves, was awesome on that run. But also he's really struggled since. And I don't know if that rush to the big leagues has anything to do with his struggles. Maybe it set unfair expectations for him. We'll see what happens. Michael Conforto came up. Everyone points to 2015, how great Conforto was on that run, and he was. But you also might remember 2016, he had to be demoted in the middle of a bad sophomore slump season. So not to say if the Mets call up Carson Benge down the stretch, he's absolutely going to struggle in 2026. But I just would be careful what you wish for when it comes to rushing a prospect. I doubt we see any of these guys this year. I don't think we see Jonah Tong under any circumstance. I think any big league opportunity is going to go to McLean and or Sproat. Ryan Clifford, I mean, it's a logjam to get playing time to corner guys, so that's just not going to happen. Jett Williams, I think you can make a case for it just because of his versatility and his speed, and if you just wanted a supercharged version of Acuna on this team down the stretch, yeah, you could conceivably do that. And again, if everything falls apart in center field, sure. And let's just say Benge keeps this heater up. Let's say he goes up to AAA, and in the first 2 weeks, he's hitting 380. And he just is smacking home runs every single week, and he just continues to dominate. The Mets might get to a point to say, this is one of the best hitters we have in our organization right now. Let's just plug and play and see what happens. I can't rule it out entirely. I wouldn't say it's a 0% chance that we see any of these three, but I think it is very unlikely. Now to the other promotions that the Mets had here. Actually, one last thing there. Again, I talked about the playoffs in AA and how Binghamton has just been outstanding this season and really has been one of the best teams in all minor league baseball and definitely the best team in AA. The AAA playoff push is still giving them that competitive atmosphere. Right now, Syracuse is tied with Scranton for first in their division for the second half. So there is something to play for all four of these guys. And again, they all get promoted together. They get 7 weeks or 6 weeks for sure. But if they get into the playoffs, 7 weeks of AAA action before some of them might go to the Arizona Fall League to set themselves up for the upcoming season. I think this really does put all of them in line to be players that are at least considered in spring training next year, depending on sort of the state of the roster. But the Mets have so much talent that they could just pretty much ignore adding position players in the offseason if they wanted to, outside of maybe reuniting with Pete Alonso and then just saying, we're going to have an open competition with the current kids that have been on the roster and the new kids on the block, and they could probably fill things out if they wanted to. So a lot of excitement in the Mets farm system right now. Now, the other 3 promotions, AJ Ewing takes Carson Benge's spot in center field for AA, gets promoted up from high A. Brendan Girton goes from high A to AA, as well as Saul Garcia. Garcia, reliever, 1.85 ERA and 34 innings pitched. Girton, a little more of a starter, 2.59 ERA and 76 in a third innings pitched. But Ewing is the bigger story because he is arguably a top 10 prospect in the Mets farm system right now. He, throughout the year in high A, hit 288 in 78 games, 387 on base, 388 slug, Not a lot of slug to his game, but a ton of speed, 44 stolen bases on 51 attempts there. But he also stole some bases in low A earlier this season. So he's got 58 stolen bases on the year, real chance to get over 70 at least. That's very impressive. A guy that has made a real push towards being considered a top 10 prospect in this system. And with that in mind, to close out the show, I figured I would give you just a very, very brief look into my current top 10. I do reserve the right to maybe adjust this list by the end of the season. But right now, as it stands with all these guys in their promotions, here's where I would put up. Here's what I would put as the top 10 prospect in the Mets farm system today on August 11th. Carson Benge, number 1. Jett Williams, number 2. The reason I have those two guys as your top prospects, I've talked to Arm about how he grades these guys on his top 100 for just baseball, or how he grades guys on the top 15s for each given team. And he said he looks at future value. Who's going to put up, if they stay with their club for 6 years, the most WAR? And position players have a better chance to put up a lot of WAR than pitchers because there's just so much more injury risk and just so much more value in an everyday guy. So that's why I have Benge and Jett 1 and 2. Jonah Tong is my number 3 prospect in this system. I really labored on that one because I think it's very interchangeable 3 through 5. I think it's more interchangeable than people would really give credit to Nolan, McLean, or Brandon Sproat, because Tong has just been dominating to such a high degree in AA. But those guys have been pitching at a tougher level. So I think those 3 pitching prospects all grouped together are outstanding. Elian Pena is doing some good things in the Dominican Summer League. I'll talk about that at some point. He's the guy that got the huge signing bonus this past offseason. So teenager that's had a lot of success. I believe he's got over 20 stolen bases and hasn't been caught much. He's just having a field day out there. So I got him at number 6. Ryan Clifford at number 7. Jacob Reimer at number 8. AJ Ewing at number 9. Jonathan Santucci rounds out my top 10 at this very moment. But again, on a future episode, I will dive into that list a lot deeper and sort of explain my rationale on all of those picks. But that's going to be all for this edition of Locked On Mets. I appreciate all of you who tuned into the show. Mets off day today for us all to relax, unwind. Tomorrow, it all starts up again, and you got to square off against the Braves. So I'll be talking about that series on tomorrow's show and any other news we get. Maybe the Mets will point us in some direction on what they're thinking for their pitching this week. I kind of doubt it, but you never know. So we will cover all of those things on that show. But as always, as I mentioned, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find a link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen, your first watch every day, not for your second watch. Check out Locked On MLB Game Night, the show that'll take you around all the action in Major League Baseball with insight from our local experts and league-wide experts that'll take you through all of the games. You can check out Locked On MLB Game Night on the Locked On MLB YouTube channel, as well as the Locked On MLB podcast feed.